So, all right, the recording has now started. We're just going to high level go over very, very basics of automation. So, big things we're going to cover today is like how we outline systems, triggers, and actions. And I'm hoping we can get through all this stuff pretty quick, and then we can go through like an actual example. So, think about it really high level. I want to start with like a really simple example. It is important when making a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, right, that you do the bread on the outside. You could probably switch steps 2 and 3, peanut butter and jelly, and do jelly or peanut butter first. That probably doesn't matter. But it's pretty important that you do the bread on the outside. You definitely want to make sure you're having these steps first. So that's what I'm talking about when I say a lot of when I'm talking about like systems mindset. Like it really comes down to thinking like what needs to happen first, and then what happens, and then what happens next, and what needs to happen last. Like what's the overall outcome, and how do we break that into individual steps? So the overall outcome of this is that I want a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. The individual steps that I need to follow is I need to have bread. Then personally, I do peanut butter and then jelly. Like I said, you could switch those two if you wanted. That one's personal preference. And then you need to follow it up with also bread. If instead we switch, let's say step 4 and step 3, and we do bread, peanut butter, bread, jelly, well, like that's going to be a really weird sandwich. It's going to be maybe hard to hold. It might be just a little awkward. Like overall, that one might not be ideal. My personal preference, at least, and I would go ahead and assume that probably most of yours as well, are going to be to have these things on kind of like the outside. So to go into a much more complicated example, which still not that complicated, but did you guys when you were kids ever have like a lemonade stand? There's a lot of steps that go into making a lemonade stand, right? First thing you got to do, you got to make sure you have all the stuff to make the lemonade. So you need to get all of your ingredients. The next thing you need to do after that, Sophia, just for reference, we're going over systems. The next thing you need to do after that is you need to actually make your lemonade. So you can do it with just these ingredients. You need to make sure you just have everything to be able to put this all together. Like if you're going to sell a product, in this case, you need to make sure you can deliver on that product. So once you have the lemonade made, then you need to figure out how much it costs, right? Like how much it costs and how much you're going to sell it for and what you're left with. Because you're not selling lemonade as a nonprofit and you're not selling lemonade to lose money, right? Like you're selling lemonade to make money. So in this instance, right, we need to figure out, okay, how much did water, sugar, lemons, ice, cups, and napkins all cost? How much are we selling it for? How much even can we sell? So if we have like 5 gallons of water or of lemonade made, and we have 8-ounce cups, how many cups of lemonade can we make? So for us to be able to determine how much we want to make, we need to start there before we can figure out the price. So we need to start by saying like, maybe I want to make $100 for my lemonade stand. And it costs me $20 in ingredients, and I can sell 20 cups. Well, those are going to be kind of expensive lemonade cups, right? But if I can increase this cups, I'll decrease this price, and I can still keep that $100 profit. So that's step 3. Like we need to figure out how much all this stuff costs, what we're going to sell it for. Then the next step is going to be like marketing. Ideally, you want something that's going to like catch the attention. So you're maybe going to make a sign that says lemonade stand, $1.50 a cup or something like that. You need to pick a location. All of that is really important. If you go on the side of a highway, sure, there's going to be a lot of people passing by, but they're not going to be able to stop and talk to you. But whereas if you pick the side of maybe a busy residential street that has a lot of foot traffic, that will probably get people stopping, and they might be like, a cup of lemonade sounds great. You'll also probably want to make sure you take the time to let your friends and family know where you'll be and ask them if they can spread the word. Maybe post about it on social media or help you get more people coming to buy lemonade so you can meet this profit goal. Then you need to actually go through and set up your lemonade stand and sell the lemonade. Once all of those things are done, then you can clean up, count your profit, and be done with it. But this is kind of what I mean by we need to think about things in a systems mindset. So we need to think about things as far as this happens and then this happens. I cannot do step 5 if I didn't do step 1 first. If I didn't acquire the ingredients, I can't do step 2 either. And that's kind of a really important piece, right? If I don't do step 3, if I don't figure out how much to charge for this, what am I supposed to put on my sign? Or what am I supposed to tell people as they're coming up? Maybe somebody wants to barter with me. If I don't know how much it costs, and let's say it cost me 50 cents and I'm selling them for $1, and somebody says, oh, would you take 50 cents? Well, the answer is no, because that's how much it cost me to build this, to make this lemonade. And I need to make sure I'm factoring in my own time, and I need to be making a profit on every single cup. So no, I wouldn't sell it for 50 cents. Maybe 51 cents, because that would be a profit. But I wouldn't go below that 50. So I need to be able to know all those figures before I can really sell, right? So all these things are really important just from a super high level to understand all the things that need to happen before we do all the other stuff. So it's not a question of whether or not we can put together a lemonade stand. It's a question of just okay, what do we do first? And what comes after that? So I'm going to go ahead and you probably can't see, but my notebook is full of process diagrams, outlining boundless processes. People like Sarah and Lana are familiar with these because I've sent them my drawings and asked them to help me put them into actual digital format. That makes things a little bit easier. But this is honestly a big part of my job and my day-to-day, and a really big part of automation. So when we're thinking about putting together processes, we kind of need to follow something similar to this, right? So automation is individual steps that go into the overall process. So it's really important to understand the process and the end goals of those process, what you're actually trying to achieve. What is the purpose of setting up an automation? So in our case, right, we have a ton of automation set up. I actually just got an email from Airtable that last month we met 95% of our automation capability. So that's about 45,000 automations last month. Solely just in Airtable, not counting all the stuff we have in Zapier and other platforms. So automation is really big, but we don't want to just set up automations and have them run for no purpose, right? We want to make sure that they're actually accomplishing a goal. So once we know what that goal is, that end goal, then we can kind of start and what I was talking about, plan and map out the process. So in our lemonade stand example, that's us saying okay, I need to have the ingredients before I can make the lemonade, right? Then you need to break that down into individual tasks. Those individual tasks that get broken down, some of them can be automated steps. So that's why it's important to really look at the overall big picture before breaking it down and automating individual pieces. So going through and being able to say, maybe for our copywriting, right? It's not worth our copywriting team's time to do quick lines the way we initially were. It took forever. It was a pain because nothing came in properly. And then quick lines would do it, but it basically would take just as much time to do quick lines as it would to custom copy, because we had to go and put the list into the raw data and then look up in our other data sheet each individual person, copy paste those in, grammar check it, make sure everything looked good. And then we'd have to do it all over again for hundreds of people, right? So what I did is I kind of mapped out the process. I was okay, this is what we're doing now. This is what it needs to be. It needs to be upload quick lines list, decide quick lines, send it to raw data and copywriting without creating duplicate copywriting tasks. So like that's a very specific example in like our business that most of you here probably are familiar with, but that's kind of like the general goal, right? Like we want to make sure we're making things better and not worse. Sometimes automation doesn't help. And I've learned that lesson the hard way a fair amount of times where I'm like, oh, we can automate this. But it's like, did we really need to? And the answer is not always yes. So once we have our individual items tasked out and we know who's doing what and what can be automated and what should be automated, then we put together like a small test to make sure it works. That's why you'll notice. So right now, for example, we're thinking of moving to Expandy as opposed to Salesflow. So there's a lot of reasons for that, but we're also not going to just make that decision rashly and move all of our clients over to Expandy without having taken the time to test it. So we're testing it right now on Andreas's account, and we're figuring out what works, what doesn't, how it interacts with Airtable, how their webhooks work, how we can improve the process while also hopefully reducing like the cost of it. So that's like a real-time example of what we're doing right now. We're testing Expandy to see if it actually does help. Then once we've tested things and we know they work, then we start more of a wide-scale implementation. So kind of back to the quick lines process I was talking about earlier. Once we tested that out on Tada, we very quickly were able to test that one. And as soon as it worked, I recorded a video going through every single step, and I sent it to our account management team to get that implemented everywhere so that we could have that change implemented everywhere we could, and that we were making those updates and making everybody's lives easier, but not before a test. So once that's done, then we need to monitor the results, figure out what's working, what's not. And ultimately, you're almost always going to see that like when you put together a process or an automation or something, like very often things go wrong. And that's okay. That's definitely just part of it. You figure out what went wrong and why. So I can use quick lines as an example. Yesterday, I was looking at a sheet and the automation wasn't set up right. Not a big deal. The person who set it up just accidentally put quick mail instead of quick lines in one of the automation pieces. So it was creating like duplicate copywriting tasks, which again, not a big deal. Pretty simple fix. I just changed quick mail to quick lines and it won't have that issue in the future. But that's what we need to be doing. We need to be looking really closely, figuring out, is this working? What is working? If there's something broken, why is it broken? Is it a process? Is it user error? Is it, just a small tweak that somebody just made a mistake, which happens. It's not that big of a deal. And then once we have all those results, then we do it again. It's pretty much never over. We're always working to improve our processes. So with that being said, does anybody have questions about like having like system mindsets and thinking about things in terms of like an overall picture or a high level system? Anybody have questions about that? No? Okay. I know you're all smart, so it's really not that complicated, but it's really important before we dive deep into automations to start here. Because we can fix small problems, but it could make larger problems in the system at large. So next, I just kind of want to briefly talk about triggers and actions, kind of what they are, and I'll give a couple examples of these. And then let's get started with some like actual automation practice. So triggers are basically like when we know that the automation needs to start. So they usually have a certain set of conditions that need to be met. Once those are met, it triggers an action. That is the base of all automation. If this happens, then do this. It's relatively simple, I guess, in that particular way. So I do want to make sure that, like, I'll give a couple examples of these, right? Of things that we do in our actual business that most of you have probably already seen or interacted with in one way or another. On LinkedIn, when we have campaigns and they're all set up and everything's sending out, we, through sales flow, get notified in Airtable when somebody responds. So the trigger there is when person responds. When person who is added to our campaign, we're going to watch them. And when they respond, the action we're having is Airtable, go find this person. That's action 1. Action 2 is then update this person's status to need reply, because they've replied and now they need a reply back. So when I say action is step 2, the action can be like multiple steps. It can go a long way in figuring out like what actually happened and what is happening and how does all this stuff work. But it's always going to come from a trigger. So there's always going to be a certain set of conditions that makes the action like necessary, because we don't want, in that previous example, right? We don't want people's statuses to be updated to need reply if they don't need a reply, right? Like that would get really confusing for us, very difficult to manage. We would never know what conversations needed to be responded to. Like there wouldn't be, we wouldn't get anything out of that automation. So another example of this might be when you submit your daily check-ins, right? Everybody has their pay rates. That I have an automation that goes in and says, okay, this person's put in their daily check-in, add their pay rate so that it calculates your pay. So you should all be able to see in your the links that you should all have of like where to view your daily submissions. You should also be able to view in those links the amount paid per day. So for that day's hours, it's going through and it's calculating, you worked this amount of hours, this is your rate, this is, the hours times the rate is the total pay. Relatively simple. That one automation, the way I laid it out just now makes it sound really simple, but how we had to go back and set it all up is actually far more complicated. So it took a lot of steps, right? We had to be like, okay, well, what if what you get paid now changes? So you get a raise. It's not unheard of. We've given everybody here, I guess, except Destiny, because she just started this week. Everybody here has gotten a raise pretty much since starting to work with us. So we need to be able to track that, right? Because I don't want to have all of your rates just be like, okay, look up, this is the current rate, and then just apply that to everything, because that's not accurate. Like, what if you get a raise tomorrow? We need to be able to differentiate your rate yesterday from your rate tomorrow. So that's why things can sometimes get a little bit more complicated, especially as we're thinking about data and how to structure everything. So like I said, this presentation, very simplified. That's everything in terms of like basic information to cover. I would really like to start with an actual example. So once you're here, go down to your personal Airtable. And if you don't have one down here, just add a workspace on the free plan. As you can see, I have stuff in here for myself that like I manage on my own, not related to Boundless. So like one of them, I have like a workout tracker, which tracks like my PRs and like my best times and all the workouts I've done over time. Like I have a big log of like exercises I've tracked and associated them with like an individual workout. So like this morning's workout looks different than the day before or the day before that. I also have one for like my house stuff. Like we all have chores that we have to do and we keep track of who has to do what. We rotate them every week and we keep track of who does what. And I also have this set up to like text me every day. Like, hey, here's what your goal is for the day. Here's what your task is for the day. So on your personal Airtables, just go ahead and add a base. And we're going to start with just like a really simple example of like getting this set up. So all of your every Airtable base starts like this. It's always going to pop up with just like a couple standard things in here. So it's going to pop up with like the name field, a status field, notes, attachments. We're going to use Airtable to set up these automations because it's simple, it's easy, it's free for everybody as long as it's not on like the boundless workspace. Like we do pay for that one. But this is a good place to like learn how to use automations. So what we're going to do, we're going to start by just putting some like dummy data in here. And we're just going to go with like a chore example just because it's really simple, right? So for my house, I don't know about you guys, but we clean the kitchen, deep clean the kitchen every week. We sweep and mop the floors every week. And we also like generally tidy up, dust, pick up anything that doesn't need to be there. So we're just going to say general tidying, right? And we're going to have statuses. It's going to just by default have these statuses. We can change them if we want. But for this particular example, we are going to go ahead and add a column. We're going to add a date field. So like when we want it to be done by. So we at least, and I'm going to just continue on the example we use in my house. We once a week each have this. I have a roommate and I also live with my boyfriend. So 3 of us live in this house. Each of us gets one of these chores and we rotate each week. So we need to know when does this need to be done. So we'll just set it for next week. And just to make things easy, we're just going to drag that value down. Now we also need to know who's assigned the chore, right? So there are, in my house, 3 people it could be. It could be me. It could be my boyfriend, Sean. Or it could be my roommate, Lee. One of us needs to do this chore. We're going to go ahead and just delete this attachments field because it doesn't need to be here. And we're going to delete the notes field because it also doesn't need to be here. Now this status field is going to be helpful, but it's not necessarily going to be like absolutely necessary. So we're just going to go ahead and actually change this field type to a checkbox because we just want to know, is the chore done or is it not? So in this case, right, like let's say I'm the one who's doing the chore, the kitchen, Sean's doing the floors, Lee's doing the general tidying. When I'm done with the kitchen, I want to check this box. And that's all well and good, right? But then what next? Like, how do we know who gets assigned the next chore? Like, who does it next? Like, there's some more variables that need to go in here, right? So what we're going to do, we're going to have, just to make it easy, a really simple automation based on like a formula. So the formula is going to say the next due date. And we are going to use a date add formula. Oh, that should be the title, sorry. Date add. So we're going to take our when it needs to be done by, and the next chore needs to be done 7 days after that. So we're going to use the formula. We're going to rely a little bit on this formula help text over here. And we know that it needs to be done by the 10th. So the next one needs to be done 7 days after that. So we're going to say 7, and then we need to tell it 7 what, right? So we're going to say 7 days. So again, using the help text in this particular formula, we need to have the little like apostrophe things in here. So create field, that should tell us the next one needs to be done the 17th. I personally am going to take out the time field. So we're not going to include a time field, and we can set like the formatting and everything up here. So let's say we want to have like really easy to see March 16th is the next due date. So the automation we are also going to set up is going to say next person to assign the chore, right? So just to make this one easy, so we're not going to have like a billion automations and stuff set up, I'm just going to input the same people who would be assigned the chore in the first place. And I'm just going to put them in a, oh, that's supposed to be, I wrote Sean twice. I'm just going to put them in like a slightly different order. It's still the same order of like these people in this order, but it's just the next one is moving up. So hopefully that makes sense. So what we're going to do is when this box gets checked, we're going to have it update this due date and add the new person who's supposed to do the chore and make this blank. So first, we're going to check this box of one of them because we need to have something that meets the conditions first before we can kind of move on. So this checkbox is going to be our trigger. And then the action is going to be updating the record. So we're going to open the automations view. And we're going to create a custom automation. So it's going to be laid out in the same way we talked about, triggers and actions. So in this case, we're going to say when a record matches conditions. We need to tell it where to look for this. And the condition is going to be that done is checked. And we're going to test it. So the reason we had to have one of them checked already is that otherwise this test won't work. It'll look for something that matches this conditions and it won't be able to find anything. So that's why we need to check something first. The next thing we're going to do is then we're going to have it update the record. So it's going to be the same one that we had next, it's going to be the same record that we checked the box in, and it's going to update it to whoever's supposed to do that one next. So in this case, it's going to be still table 1, and we need to tell it which record to update. So we're going to use our record up here because it's going to pull through all of these values. So it's going to say when a record matches these conditions, and then it's going to give us all the information of that record that matches those conditions. So we're going to add in the record ID up here. So that's how it knows which record. And we want it to update the date that it needs to be updated and the person who is assigned the chore. So the date, we're just going to go ahead and use our formula field. So we calculated when the next due date is, and we're just going to insert that value. And we also added in a simple way to have the chores assigned. And we're going to say next person to do chore, and we're going to add that person's name in. And then we are going to test. One of the easiest ways to test is to minimize the full view so you can see it happening real time. Oh, and then the other thing we actually need to do is we need to update done to false. So this check mark is what's called a Boolean value. So that's either true or false, 0 or 1. It's going to follow something along those. But false is going to mean blank. True is going to mean checked box. So we're going to test the action. Let's see if it works. Perfect. So the automation there updated so that the next person who does this chore is going to be Sean. It needs to be done by the 17th. And it's also going to be set up to calculate the next due date. So now if I check that, let's say Sean swept and mopped the floors, it's not going to do anything. Does anybody know why? Because we didn't turn the automation on. So we got the automation all set up, but we didn't turn it on. So now, if we check this box, it should work. And it's going to update all those values. So we know Next person to sweep and mop the floors is going to be Lee. And then when Lee goes in and checks this box, that's not going to work because this we didn't set up to be like automatically rotating. Then, we'll be nice to Lee and like he finished his chore too. So now we're going to wait and it's going to be my turn to do that one. So this is just like a really simple automation, but hopefully it makes sense of like thinking about things in like a system, right? Like this chore needs to be done before it gets assigned to the next person, right? And we need to think about things in terms of like triggers and actions. So we need to like verify, have a manual step that we say like, this is done before we can assign the chore to the next person. It's not fair, right? For, let's say, if I don't finish my chore by this date, it's not super fair for me to then just not have to do it and for it to just go to the next person. So we need it to be like verified as like done before it gets added to the next person. So that's everything for today. That's the really simple automation basics. Hopefully gets everything kind of set up. Hopefully this makes sense. Does anybody have any questions on that?